What you're about to experience are my opinions and truths. I'm suggesting these possibilities for you to consider, enabling you to come up with your own conclusions. Ladies and gentlemen, code breakers around the world, wherever you may be, my name is Logan. I'm going to be your tour guide for this presentation on the topic of Mercury. This will be Mercury Decoded. This is the Mercury series. Already released The Serpent and the Woman, and now Mercury and the symbol of Mercury. You know, Mercury is the only metal on the periodic table that is liquid at room temperature. The symbol of Mercury is very similar to Venus's. The only variance is that it has the crescent moon on the top, which can be devil horns. It does have the spirit, the circle. It does have the cross, matter. But it does have the crescent moon here. And this could mean spirit into matter from the moon. Whereas Venus, spirit into matter from the sun. That's the variance between the two. So Mercury has the quicksilver, it's so embedded in our reality in thermometers, in the old school thermometers to tell the temperature, amalgams in dental work. But Mercury is in engines, in outboard motors for boats, Mercury racing. It's in a lot of things. And it is obviously in our astrological signs. Being the ruler of Gemini, which is tied to the prison, and classically Virgo, which is tied to Adam and Eve and the paradise, because Virgo is the sixth sign and that's the last day of creation. So there really is a lot of layers of Mercury being the serpent. A lot. And we've already kind of gone over in The Serpent and the Woman how I think Prometheus is tied to the serpent, which would be heavily tied to Mercury. I've always had it kind of pegged as Pluto, although Pluto kind of has a very similar symbol as well as Mercury. So with that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go on and we're going to kind of set the foundation here. You know, Mercury has that nature of being the trickster. In the Loki Thor series in the comics, Loki being Thor's brother, Thor being, of course, tied to maybe Jesus, the good character, or, the good cop, bad cop. But it was really an elusive energy, as it says here. And Mercury is one of the three elements that are necessary for the Philosopher's Stone. You need sodium, sulfur, and mercury to make lead out of gold, and maybe the transition alchemically as a human being. So this is the spirit into matter. And you can see Mercury was able to unify the opposites. This is why I would imagine it was tied to the Philosopher's Stone. So when we get into the archon perspective, it's got the word L in it. This is from the Gnostic traditions and the archon of the Gnostic cosmology, which is one of the seven that are here to keep you trapped in the matrix. So Helios uses communication and trickery to keep you bound to Maya. And that's a lot like the serpent in the story of how the serpent comes into play. And then we get into, the Christ energy, which, I've stated that, listen, Jesus was a messenger. And Jesus was born of a virgin, and virgin is Virgo, and Virgo is ruled by Mercury. Well, there's this thing in the Roman aspects of the historicity, which is called Alexamenos Graffito. I don't know if you've ever heard of this before, but it is this aspect right here. It is a Roman graffiti, and they have removed it and put it into a museum of all places. It's kind of weird. But this is kind of the overlay of it. And it was kind of a mockery of Jesus. So they put the donkey head on there. Well, that's probably because of the scripture in Zechariah that talks about the return of the Messiah that rides on a donkey. But if you read the text from the Gnostic traditions, this deity of the archons has the head of a donkey. So is there a perversion here? Well, there always is, right? There always is a darkness to the light. But it's very interesting that in the Old Testament, the Messiah comes riding in on a donkey. It's very, very fascinating. So we're going to talk about all that, and I'll leave it up to you on what it is that you want to adopt as your truth. But we're now going to shift into the game of chess. This is not the first time that I'm showing this. But in the New Testament, what's very uncanny about this is the chapter and verse in question. Because Revelation chapter 16, verses 16 is talking about Armageddon, which is the big battle before the end of the world, or before the transition into the new world. And I just find it fascinating that there are 16 black and 16 white pieces in the game of chess. So as it says, when they gathered the kings together for Armageddon, this is the classic yin versus yang, the angel versus the demon, right? And who gathered the kings together? That's the big question mark, which has many different interpretations. So the word Armageddon in the Greek, because it is coming from Revelation, I have it there at the top, circled at the bottom, gives us a total numerology of the number 80. And that is the protons of Mercury. Keep in mind that tree of life in Hebrew is 80. And Mercury has something very special on the periodic table that only one other element shares with it, which is xenon, and that is Mercury and xenon are the only two elements that have 7 stable isotopes. And if you watched my Mercury and the Serpent Decoded, I think it was the title of it, I showed the menorah in Judaism, which has 7 candles, lines up with Mercury and xenon. Of course, the middle is Nun, which is the Nun of Nazareth, which is the serpent. So could Mercury just be the liaison to communicate to everybody in the world what needs to be communicated to you? And when we continue on with this, we go to the actuality of Mercury, which in the modern Greek is the number 59. And, the total scripture here in Revelation 16 verses 16, there's 59 letters here. So is that done on purpose? Is that part of the scripted reality, that this total word adds up to 80, which is the protons of Mercury, and then there are 59 total letters for this scripture in Revelation 16 verses 16 from the original Greek? I find it very interesting. Well, let's keep going. So when we do Revelation, Apocalypsis, in the original Greek, 16 versus 16, we get 156 for the total. And I'm going to go to chemistry for that. And that is the element gadolinium, which is the God element. And notice the big takeaway, 64 protons. And if you didn't catch it, how many squares on a classic chessboard? 64. So this has a lot of merit, 16 pieces and 16 pieces, when we start to do the numerology and it connects to chemistry, and there's the God element. And remember, gadolinium in Chaldean equals 35, which is the same output as the word simulation. Because that's what we're living in. A movie, which is called the simulation. So when we add up the neutrons, protons, and electrons of gadolinium 156, we get something that emerges that's kind of really mind-blowing. It's a humdinger. It's the tree of life and tree of knowledge of good and evil from the original Hebrew, 220. And isn't that what the white and black represents? Considering that this is 16 pieces of white and 16 pieces of black coming together to battle it out. Well, now you know the tree of life and tree of knowledge just means duality. That's all it means. Good cop, bad cop. This is the polarity of our reality. The yin and the yang. So, most of these planets have what are called magic squares. I don't know where these came from. You can read about where they came from, but there's no solidification of whether or not it's accurate. But it doesn't matter because they have messages. And Mercury's magic square just so happens to have 64 squares, which is the chessboard. Now, think about it, man. Chess is a thinking man's game. Or a thinking woman's game. Thinking is tied to Mercury. Is it not? Mercury in your astrological chart is on how you think. You can tell a lot about how somebody's Mercury placement's all about. So there's the white and the black. There are 16 black pieces. There are 16 white pieces. Right here, Mercury has 7 stable isotopes. This is its most abundant, 202. And 22 is a double 2, which is a master number. That's tied to titanium. I know the zero's there, but that means infinite potential. See, this is tree of life in Hebrew. Tree of life in Hebrew is 80. And titanium is 22. And the Titans in the Greek mythology got cast down to earth to be put in prison. And that's essentially what we all are, the Titans. So when we continue on with this, and we see that it's 16 versus 16, and 16 is tied to sulfur, which is fire. It's also tied to oxygen, which is the air that we breathe. Well, what gets really interesting about this, ladies and gentlemen, is taking the rules of what we've done with the cards in the tarot and the periodic table. Anytime you get a total, like Mercury has 80 protons, there are not 80 squares here, but there are a total of 64. So all we do is take the 64 as the guide, as the foundation, and subtract that 80. We want to get to 64 below, so we get 16. And then we do the same thing for the 202. We do it 3 times and we get to the number 10. You notice that there's the golden ratio right there. On top of that, Matthew chapter 1 verses 16 is when Jesus comes on the scene. And the 116 is in these numbers. The 0 means infinite potential. It's when we place them on the board, space 10 and space 16, where it gets super interesting because they end up becoming a white pawn and a black pawn. Space 10 is the black pawn, space 16 is a white pawn. What would the odds be that we do these formulas, that this is not the first time we've done these formulas, we've done them many times now, but how do we land on a yin and a yang? Just coincidentally. based on Mercury's magic square having a total of 64 squares, and that's how many squares a chessboard has. And it's black against white. And white makes the first move in the classic game of chess. And you can add up the squares. We could easily go to the squares. We would have G7 versus H2. We would be able to add that up as well. But nonetheless, when you add the two up, you get 26, and that's the total numerology of Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh. So Mercury's the trickster. Mercury is known as El, and El is a word for God. That's why you have Elohim. So am I saying that Mercury is the Yod? Not directly, but you could see how it's connected to that. Without any question, it's connected to that. So when we keep going here, we can do the numerology of all the spaces, of all 32 spaces, since it's 16 against 16. So we just take all of the spaces from chess that are already set in stone, and we put them into the Chaldean numerology cipher. And Chaldean gives us a total of 268. Remember, Chaldean is very special because it works off of the numbers 1 through 8 only, and 8 times 8 is 64. There are 64 possible codons in our DNA. So there's the 64 squares, 32 and 32. But it gives us a total value of 268, and I'm going to go right into chemistry, and it gives us this element called dubnium, which is a synthetic element. But that's not the clue. The clues are in the numbers. And the first thing that I picked up on was the 105. And that is the numerology of Yahweh, Yah. This is the Yah, the 105. 105. So we have Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh here based upon the breakdown of the two spaces from Mercury and the 80 and the 202. And then we have in the black and the white, the yin and the yang. And then we have it here based on the prefix of Yah. We don't have to go the Yahweh. The way is us. Yah is the controller. And 15 is the devil card in the tarot. So dubnium has this 268, which is the total numerology of all 32 squares on the chessboard. And the 105 is tied to the 105 here, the Yod-Heh. But remember, in the classic Disney movie Tron Legacy, Jeff Bridges tells his son, who tries to come down and rescue him, the only way to win is not to play, which was in war games as well. The only way to win is not to play. We're talking about the game of chess, folks. We're talking about Armageddon. This is encouraging you to look deeper because most people won't. And when it comes to picking a side, because that's what Jesus wants you to do in Revelation 3 verses 15, he wants you to be part of Armageddon, which is picking up a side which is polarity. But you already know that it's already set in stone and it's not your war. Which is why Jeff Bridges says, hey, I'm not playing, dude. The only way to win is not to play. So we can also go to how many total squares are on that chessboard, how many 32 and 32 is 64, and the element that has the 64 beyond the gadolinium. Beyond this right here. Beyond this, and being the GD element, having 64 squares, we also have zinc having 64 for an isotope. And the word demiurge equals 30 in Chaldean, Jehovah equals 30 in Chaldean, Allah in Arabic equals 30, Yaldabaoth is 30 in the Greek. So this is a really, really big deal because this 30 is tied to role play. Are we being role played on the chessboard? 64 squares, 64 possible chromosomes in our DNA. Are we being role played? And here are our blood types to connect to nihonium. And there's the blood, there's the red blood cell, and then the 113 is the 30th prime number, which ties to role play. We've been going over this for a long time now. Are we being role played on the chessboard? That's what it says. He gathered, who's he? Gathered them together, and this will come down to interpretation, and I know some scholars will say, well, it's Satan, it's the devil. Well, Mercury is known as the Prince of Darkness. So there's that to play with. So he gathers it together for white against dark. It's the tree of life against the tree of knowledge. And so it's literally, ladies and gentlemen, the sun against the moon. That's really what this whole thing says. The white is the sun, the black is the moon. The white is the tree of life, the black is the tree of knowledge. This is, see, when you come into this world, if you really look at it from a simplistic viewpoint, when you are born into this world, you're born white, pure, no blemishes. Everything works great. Digestion works good. Cuts and scrapes heal quickly. But over time, what happens? You become black. Things don't heal as quickly. It's very simple with a pair of shoes. When you buy a brand new white pair of tennis shoes or sneakers, you know, what you'll do is they'll get dirty and you'll get a rag and try to wipe it off and try to keep them clean because they're new. But give it about 6 months to a year and you'll stop caring about the sneaker or shoe. You won't clean it off. You may just be lackadaisical on that. Because you're like, because it's lost its shiny new toyness. It's lost its luster. And what the shoe will do, it will end up becoming black or, dirty to where it's time to throw them away, give them to charity, give them to somebody else, give them to whatever. So the black represents the darker side of the light. This represents old, been around for a long time. These are the Titans. These are the Olympians. This is the sun. This is the moon. This is what we all reach in our wintertime. We become very educated. We become the smartest that we have ever been. Like when you die, you will die the smartest you've ever been. You can't get any smarter than what you get before you're ready to die. See, how many days that you live out on this life, each day you become more wiser. You become more darker because every time you collect something, it makes you darker. Every time you collect more knowledge, it makes you fill up with more knowledge, which can be heavy. But here as a baby, you're pure. You're not polarized yet. And there are people that you see that have polarization based upon the team that they work for, that claim to work for that team. I work for this team. I work for that team. But in all actuality, both sides are owned by the same boss. Life is owned by death, and death is owned by life. That's the same boss. Because if there was no death, there would be no life, and vice versa. And this is why the tree of life and tree of knowledge is the chessboard. But there are layers to this where if it's not your fight, then don't go fight. Debating and arguing and bickering and trying to prove somebody wrong, that puts you on the board. Why are we doing these things? Because you're playing the game at a very high level when you do these things. When you do not engage in the game, you take yourself off the board and you become somebody in the stands watching. That's all. But most people want to get on the board because they want the recognition, they want the likes and subscriptions, they want to have people say, oh my God, you killed that, you did so amazing. They want the acknowledgement from the fans in the stadium. That's why people go on stage and they perform, because without the audience, they wouldn't perform. So it's very important to understand this information, because when you get thrown to the Armageddon, when you're pitted against one of these sides, the question is, are you going to get on the court and continue on being role played? And yes, is it predestined to make that choice to not to do it? Yes. And maybe this is why you're getting this information, because the decision that has already been predetermined for you has been tailored based upon what I'm showing you here, or what we're showing you. These are the layers that you needed to hear in order for you to make the decision to say, I'm not going to play. I'm not playing this anymore. Realizing that wars are all part of this, being on the playing field. And then the people here are essential, because this playing field needs the audience to give them energy. Like if nobody bought tickets to go to a concert, like if a band showed up and nobody showed up to watch their show, would they play the show? No. You need fans in order for you to show up. You need acknowledgement to put on the show. That's why the news works so well, because people tune into the news because the news offers you something that you're interested in, and they need you because they're selling commercials and they're making money off of your eyeballs. But essentially what this is saying, and I will finish it here, is that the tree of life and tree of knowledge are the two trees that feed each other. And not everybody comes in and plays out one or the other. They'd have a dominating sector in their life in duality. And there's that 220, which is a permutation of that 202. You see, so when you have the eyes to see, you as a code breaker, this is the same as this. Same thing. It doesn't have to be in exactly that order. But I know that the tree of life and tree of knowledge is the chessboard, and the chessboard has 64 squares, and Mercury and its magic square is the chessboard. And Mercury is tied to being the prince of darkness, the trickster. So the question is, no matter what all this information brings, and now you have the eyes to see, what is religion? Religion does this. Religion is like, get on the board and play. It wants you to play the game so you can be part of the war. But we know better now here. We know better now that because you are both of these. You're going to lean more towards one than the other, but essentially you don't have to get on the court to be white or black, because you already are. But there's nothing to fear. Remember, this is a movie. Okay, so no matter what you see and all of these things that I show you, and maybe this is the trickster. This is spirit into matter with the crescent horn, and this could be the moon, and this could be the controller of the black side, and Venus would be controlling the white side, because we know Jesus is Venus, and that's love. But of course, Mercury, this has a job to do, just like this has a job to do. So if this is indeed the trickster servicing the dark side, it has a nemesis and an opposite, which is going to be the white side. And you can't have one without the other in this dualistic reality. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so that's what I got for you on this Mercury Decoded. I hope you got something out of it. That's all I got for today. My name is Logan for Decode Your Reality. Until next time, we will see you later.